Let me start with Eric Collins. Eric is a 1996 graduate of VCU's Communication Arts department with an emphasis in illustration. He later earned a graduate degree from the School of Visual Arts in New York City in 2008. He is, of course, an artist, but he is also a father, an educator, a vegetarian, and a skateboarder, not necessarily in that order. Welcome, Eric. We also have Shayne Herrera. Shayne is a relatively recent graduate of VCU's painting and printmaking with a BFA, which he earned last year in 2022. He currently works as a freelance oil painter while assisting classes at the Highland School as an artist in residence. We have Errol Nelson. Errol is a graduate of the University of Florida with a BA in history and a minor in art history, but he's a 2022 recipient of the Master of Fine Arts degree in art history from VCUarts. Errol is currently a curatorial assistant at the University of Florida's Harn Museum of Art, while he continues to develop original research on Black and queer art histories in the United States. Welcome, Errol. We have Tristan Zambrano. Tristan is a storyteller and creative professional. He earned the BA degree in fashion merchandising and minored in marketing from VCU. He's also the founder and creative art director for Alma Mater, which is an original clothing label which he founded along with a couple of VCU alums. In addition, we have Sinclair Emoghene. I hope I pronounced that right, Sinclair. Sinclair is the assistant professor of dance and choreography in both dance and a dance researcher whose work investigates the body as a performance surface while restructuring the ways that historical data in dance is structured, presented, and archived. He received the Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Benin in theater arts, and he received the Master of Fine Arts from the University of Maryland in dance performance and choreography. And then last but certainly not least, we have a faculty member as well, Wes Taylor. Wes is an associate professor of graphic design at VCU. He splits his time between Richmond and Detroit and is the co-founder of Design Justice Network, an international network of design practitioners centered care and Black feminist theory in design discourse and process. Talking Dolls Detroit, a Black-owned space maker, brand incubator, print shop, ceramics, studio gallery, and also additional print shops. And Complex Movements, a Detroit-based artist collective supporting the transformation of communities by exploring the connections of complex science and social justice movements throughout multimedia interactive performance work. So those are our panelists that we will hear from today. And let's jump right into it. The first question that we have that has been presented by, some have been presented by students as well as the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. What brought you to VCU and why did you stay in college? And so Eric, since you're the first one on my list, first one I introduced, why don't I let you start us off and tell us what brought you to VCU and what made you stay?
So I have lived in Virginia all my life. My parents went to college. They told me after doing a little research from high school that VCU was one of the best schools in the country and the in-state tuition did not hurt. So at that time, the tuition was probably not as expensive as it is these days, but the location, as well as it being one of the best schools. And I went to Midlothian High School, so the other thing that happened was there were a few students from VCU that actually visited my high school, so I was able to ask them questions before I actually applied as well. I stayed because my parents had indoctrinated me very early on that not going to school was not really an option, so I never thought that there were students that did not go to school and complete school.
Shay, do you want to pick it up from there?
Sure, yeah. For me, initially, I didn't really want to do art in the first place. But throughout school, I saw like a poster. I was against the walls right outside my art room. And so I walked by it all the time. And I applied last minute because I told myself, I was like, all right, we're just gonna bet on myself. And so I went there and then I got in. And then ultimately why I stayed in college was just to get a degree. I'm gonna be honest, it was just to get a degree. And then I ended up staying because of the community that was around me and then the community that I was a part of. So yeah.
Great. We want to talk about that community in a little bit, but let's go to Errol and find out what brought Errol to VCU.
In searching for a grad program, one of the things that was really important to me was not only an advisor fit that fit my interest in my research, but a place in which I thought I could flourish. I was really grateful to be awarded a graduate assistantship, which allowed me to travel from Florida to study in Richmond for 2 years, and very grateful for that opportunity. And that sort of, at least on a material level, helped me stay through my program, just the funding to really slow down and focus on my work.
Wonderful. Tristan.
Yeah, so kind of similar to Shayne, I applied off a whim. I was a first generation immigrant American here, so I didn't really have a lot of like basis on what college was or like what school would, what life would kind of be like after high school. So I applied last minute and I got in, and I was originally admitted into the School of Business. But after some really strong convincing by Miss Mullins, she convinced my mom to let me stay and transfer into School of Arts, and that's kind of how I came into VCUarts, and I stayed for community, as Shayne was saying as well.
Terrific. Now, for Sinclair, it's a bit of a different perspective because Sinclair, you came as a faculty member, but what attracted you to VCU as a faculty member?
Oh, thank you. Nice to meet everyone. I actually interviewed for other jobs and got 3 jobs lined up, and VCU stood out for me because of the diversity of the students. The artistic expressions were varied. I wanted that energy. And the community was quite tight-knit, and identifying that as a Black artist myself coming from Africa, I had a place to speak and people would support me. That was one of the reasons why I definitely chose VCU.
And Wes, how about yourself as a faculty member?
I chose VCU because I had some really close colleagues working here, and they put a pretty hard press on me to apply to the position. And after I checked out Richmond and VCU, and I would say I'm coming from not having that much awareness of VCU as an institution to coming here and being really impressed, and then ultimately wanting to be here because there were so many great artists and academics in this space.
Now, Shayne, you were the first one that brought up community. How did you guys develop a sense of community for yourself at VCU? What were some of the groups that you were involved in, organizations? How exactly did you go about creating that community for yourselves that was so instrumental in sort of keeping you here at the university as well as in Richmond? And Shayne, I'll let you start that off, and everybody else just kind of jump in.
Sure. The community that I found was called BASE. It's called Black Art Student Empowerment. I initially found it through my roommate. The president would happen to be, I think, his NSO leader. And then I just followed them on Instagram, went to one of their events, and then joined on the spot. Ultimately, sorry, at home. ultimately what I did was I joined right on the spot. I just got intrigued because the schooling that I had before in my high school, there wasn't a lot of people that looked like me. There wasn't a lot of Black people. And so through my art, wanted to find a community that would help support me, but also I was able to help someone else and be a support to them. And once I found that community, I generally stayed in it, and I was lucky enough to be elected the president, and where I served for 3 years there.
Terrific. Now, the community that you found was or was not an art-based community?
It was an arts-based community. It was there just to like foster community within VCUarts students, but also help provide resources to them, events that they can go to help them with their artistic career, and then get other departments connected together, because it's VCUarts, but a lot of times people don't necessarily mingle with other departments because maybe they may not have that many classes together. But it's important to network because someone else may have a resource that you may not have close to you, and so that they can help you and you can help them in their artistic careers.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned that some of the departments don't mingle together. Why do you think that is?
One, I think is basically like, it could be just be location wise. The buildings are completely separate. But another one is that like there's not that much communication happening between like teachers and professors amongst the departments. And so if someone has an event that they are opening up to public and other artists around in the like on campus, that communication doesn't really reach other departments until it's too late or until it's the day of. And so people aren't able to go. And so it creates a cycle, and people just happen to mingle with the same people they've been mingling with since they were freshmen. And now they're juniors entering their senior year, and their track and mindset is completely different. Now they're focused on getting out of college and making sure their career is straight in that regard, instead of focusing on networking and community when they get in.
Well, Tristan, you also mentioned community as one of the things that kept you at VCU. Tell us a little bit about your experience and the kinds of communities that you were part of during your academic career.
Yeah. There's so many communities I can really talk about. It's kind of hard to pinpoint one. And that's just the beautiful thing about Richmond and VCU's, kind of makeup itself. It garners so many eclectic people that you can just kind of mesh with anyone in the school, regardless of background. One thing that was really, really keen for me was finding a group of like-minded individuals who like help drive me in so many different ways outside of like, just mentally, but, people who were motivating me in so many different ways. And I found that in my community room in my freshman year dorm. And from there, I met a few guys who I tagged along with, and we helped start the Men of Color Initiative at VCU. And that was one of the really big communities that, I was a part of. I led their mentorship program and their social media coordinator for 2 years. And then after that, my junior year, I wanted to be a part of something bigger. And I ended up joining Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. And being a part of these so many different communities, I felt a responsibility to give back to, the communities that helped raise me and the communities that influenced me in such a greater way that, ultimately I wanted to finish my job in my chapter here in Richmond.
Sinclair, I think you also mentioned community, but your community might have been a little bit different than what we've heard so far, but share with us the kind of community that you were able to be a part of, particularly as someone who is not from the United States, is not from Richmond. How did that play out for you?
Well, I would say that there not been many for me, and that's a struggle. So there is this, as faculty members, we're always doing research, we're in our own space, and before you know it, the semester is over and everybody's gone, and we're also busy all the time. However, I think there is a sense of collective community, and what I mean by that is that although we may not have physical interaction all the time, that there is something about understanding that we are here for you and we are around you that gets you going as a faculty member. So even though you're doing research and you're away from people for most of the year, you know that you do have a community and understanding, really, kind of a spiritual support, if I would say.
And Errol, I know you were not an undergraduate at VCU, but you came as a graduate student. Was that a different experience for you in terms of finding community here at VCUarts?
I think in the context of graduate school, what was really helpful in the art history department is its side arm, the Art History Graduate Student Association, which is sort of a platform for graduate students in the department to come together, discuss options, socialize, but also build solidarity and scholarship. And I think coming in, I was really intentional about building an intentional community of solidarity and what I like to call horizontal solidarity that sought to support each other as opposed to traditional views of graduate school that seek to sort of appease professors, appease things that sort of hold up toxic structures, not only in the academy, but those that mirror problematic structures outside of the academy. So in order to combat that, I really sort of latched on and sort of talked to my community about that and about supporting each other and that together we can achieve more. And I think that was definitely a huge support.
Great. Now, everyone has their own way of developing community as well. I want Eric to jump in and let us know about community when he was in school as well. And Wes, for you as a faculty member, what is your feeling on the community currently here at VCU?
You know, jokes aside, I guess it was a little while ago since I was in school, so I would say that things were a little different. Art Foundation, everybody went through school for Art Foundation, and I would say that the transition from high school to college allowed me to interact with artists that were going to multiple disciplines, and I tried to keep those relationships throughout the years. So if I had to build a portfolio box, I went to the sculpture department. I had a few friends that were in the sculpture department. I talked to them. I actually had some individuals that were going through fashion, and because I was focused on drawing, they were saying, hey, can you help me figure out how to draw these patterns? So that community I felt was strong. Then when I went through communication arts, I hung out with photography, graphic design, and illustration. So I actually tried to keep an open mind, thinking that even though my discipline was specific in illustration, I could see where video is potentially used for illustration. I also went to dance shows. So when I was seeing dance performances, I was thinking about the choreography and things like that. So I just I felt like my community was actually the art school because I was going to events as much as I can when I had free time. I had friends in multiple disciplines. More specifically, I did join the Richmond Illustrators Club during, Alex Bostic was the professor at the time, and he spearheaded the illustration club. We brought in illustrators from all across the country, and that gave us an excuse to have events. And then people from outside of illustration came to those events. And so I think that events through clubs allowed reinforced community as well.
And Wes?
I would say that community and community building has shifted and been really impacted due to COVID. And I would say community building pre-COVID was different in that being in person and being able to gather and do things without, the weight of COVID was just a different thing. And so if I reflect, my way of community building is partying. Like I go out and I kick it. We go to the bar, we go to the club. And I find people, especially like faculty members, that enjoy those things, like just to go out and really kind of wild out in ways. And that's how I actually built my community. Throwing parties, throwing events, gatherings, and things of that nature. And then that can be trailed down to dinners and, you know, slightly tamer events. But I would say during COVID, and as we are still in COVID, there's a lot more intention that has to go into community building and making. And then I always think about the way communities are built, and what I think about community in that way is I always try to check myself to see if I'm networking or if I'm building a network. And if I'm networking, then I'm doing the wrong thing. If I'm building a network, that means I'm forming friendships prior and prioritizing what I can get out of that relationship and more how I can mutually be in a long-term sustained type of relationship with that person through genuine interest in that person, not what they do or what they can do. And I always use that when I'm community building and checking myself on that.
What do you say, Wes, to someone who, like yourself, is well into your professional years and you've got so much going on in terms of the work that you're doing that they say, I don't have time to network, I don't have time to build a network. You know, what kind of advice can you give someone like that?
I mean, if they don't have time to build a network, then that's better for them. I guess they're, you know, collecting dollars without having to socialize or having to deal with other people. I mean, I'm an introvert. I would much rather have that world than having to deal with people. But I would say that if you don't have, I mean, I definitely can see a scenario where somebody feels that they don't have time to network. I've just never experienced that or understand how you can move through the world in that way. And yeah, if somebody says they don't have time to network, actually would be really suspicious of them, first of all, and ask what they do. And so we would start from there and then have a conversation.
Now, here's one for all of you. What does it mean to be a creative and a person of color? How does it impact your work? And in terms of how you approach your industry, what does it mean to be a man of color in what you do? Whoever wants to start can jump right in.
Sure. Oh, sorry. But for me personally, like being like a Black man in the industry that in like painting and so, I constantly like just have to check how I'm depicting Black bodies just in general, but a lot of my work is centered around uplifting women just because of my upbringing. But also, I just have to check myself for like patriarchy and just understanding that the medium that I work in was and still is heavily controlled by men. And so the ideas of like colonialism and through the art industry and the industry that I work in is like very consistent. And to me, it's like ingrained into what I do, but I have to consistently like check myself and be like, okay, is this my view, or is this like a view that was imposed on me that I just happen to view as a standard? And so that's what it means for me. And for it to come through as like a Black man, then it's like it's heightened. But how I approach my industry with it, yeah, that's what I would say. I just have to like consistently like check myself and know and understand that like my work is seen as like Black artwork. It's always seen as Black art and not just art. And so getting over those hills is always a consistent battle as well.
What do you think about that? Your work being seen as Black art versus just art?
Yeah, like
heard that, and people talk about the fact that, because you're a person of color, that the kind of work that you do somehow gets labeled as, Black art. What do you think they mean by that?
I think a lot of that just happens to be a way in which people that aren't within like a certain community, it gives them the ability to understand work within themselves. So like they actually don't have to do the work in understanding it. And so like to label something as Black artwork is to just label as something like, other. It doesn't fit in this realm. So, it's okay for it to look bad, or it's okay for it to like be this type of, have it run on a different scale. And so like if it's compared to other artwork, which is colonial in my view, then it just has a different scale to measure up to. And so it either gives, to me, in my experience, going up against artwork is like going up against like this unhealthy standard. And so if it doesn't meet these perceptions, then it just gets labeled as Black art. And it's like, oh, we don't have to really respect it. We don't have to make room for it.
So do you think that the general population thinks that Black art is less than?
To an extent, because there isn't room for it. And so if it doesn't follow like the standard, then then other people have to do the work in trying to understand it. But no one wants to do that because of the stigma around just artwork in general. Especially like the community that I'm in like up north, not in Richmond, but up north, like they view artwork as just portraiture and that's it. And so they actually don't want to put in the work to view anything else as artwork or like photography or videography or dance or anything like that.
How about some of the others? How does being a person of color and a creative impact what you do in your day to day?
I mean, I'll go really quick. I mean, it impacts everything I do. So I don't know how to separate that. And then I think to follow up on the question about Black art and the room for it, and I think that a conversation about art is, to me, like now where I am in my career and my appreciation of art and the conversation I have, it's difficult for me to have a conversation about Black art without being the failures of white art, of like not calling it white art. And so like I always try to contextualize that to be like, there is no general art. It's always coming from a cultural context and perspective. And so therefore the failures of the art world, if we want to have these labels, then actually white artists need to identify their work as white art, and we can call it out and call that white art and see what the standards are when they have these labels to them, instead of like them just being placed and imposed on the things that we create.
I can add to that. I think being a Black artist, really, there is a burden that has fallen upon us. We are tasked to translate our work consistently. We are placed in positions where we have to defend what we do. Either, especially with the question, is this intellectual? Is this capable of impacting new knowledge? What is this? And we are there to defend what we do. And also to translate. So we have to speak in different types of languages, sort of massaging the ears of whoever is listening. And that takes a lot to do, not only making works, but you have to train yourself in training other people to look at and view your work and experience your work. And then after that, you have to deal with the trauma of their feedback to you. So the types of minimizing languages that they use to talk about the experiences they got from your work, and really how they see you as an artist. And so I think for me, the conflict that I have, backing up on what they said before, is saying that the white artist or the Western artist they have an unmarked territory. That means they can create art from anything and from whatever, and it makes sense. However, we have this marked territory where we don't cross that boundary. When we do, there is suspicion. So why are you doing that? I mean, as a Nigerian, I've had people walk up to me and say, Sinclair, did you do that when you were back home? That wasn't a praise. That was telling me, hey, you're passing your boundary. You're crossing that boundary. You shouldn't do that. And so although sometimes the marked boundary has given us some opportunity, like when, George Floyd happened, you saw Black artists getting those opportunities. That is because we have that marked boundary. We are in our boundary. And so they have a location to go give us that sort of token. Is a sweet and sour situation because we want to have that boundary to feel empowered and have a unified community and voice, but we also want to feel like we are contributing to the world of art and civilization and be part of everyone else, and sort of saying that, can we have it all? I think people are having it all. Why can't we do that? So I think the burden of being an artist, a Black artist waking up every morning is really gearing up to fight and defend yourself and go through all these types of racial conversation that ends up traumatizing the artist.
So Sinclair, I mean, what I hear you saying, in popular culture, there's been a lot of talk recently about white privilege and what that is. And what I hear you saying is that there might be white privilege as it relates to art and just anything that Black creatives might do, that there's a certain line that they have to at least meet or cross before they are given the same respect as an artist that happens not to be of color, that could do the same thing, but it would be regarded as art.
Correct.
Am I putting it out there, or is that what you're saying?
Correct. I mean, it's a complex issue. I think one of the things that I'm saying, including that, is that, I don't think we should bring it down to privilege, because that is really, for me, it's kind of turning down that conversation of saying, take responsibility for what you are doing, rather than saying, take responsibility for something that you have been placed in. When we talk about white privilege, it's seeming that we're telling people that they have been given this privilege. Rather, I am saying, in the modern day, in 2023, you're not being given any privilege anymore. You are performing something that you think is a privilege of yours. That means, as an audience, when you go see a dance performance choreographed by a Black man, the way that you perceive that performance is coming directly from how you have seen the world of Black performance. And so you're going to present your ideas about that performance from your own personal experience of what you think Black performance is. Before we even get to playing with privilege, which talks about giving opportunities to particular kind of groups and racial group and of people, Black artists themselves find it difficult to even begin to talk about their qualifications and how they can participate in this global conversation.
Now, Errol, how about you? How has being a person of color impacted what you do as a curatorial assistant?
I think there is a boundary that exists in museum. As Shayne was saying, art itself is bound in a very colonial legacy, and the museum is no different as a space for the quote unquote display of the quote fine arts, and sort of deciding who and what artists get to navigate those space, and then furthermore under what category they get to navigate that space. For example, rather than being considered an American artist, perhaps there's an additional label that really needs to be troubled or thought about before we just name someone an African American artist, and like what context are we doing that in comparison, and why? But I think there's also kind of a circular argument, in which I think some of the makers in this panel have really beautifully illustrated, that there is like that kind of liminal space for like a sense of empowerment. But I think as far as how it impacts professionally, it's just a conversation that is really being driven and continues to need to be driven in museums. So.
And we'll move to you as well, Eric.
My mind's going in a bunch of different places, but the thing that I would try to pinpoint is, I think that in general, what people are saying is that the moment I enter the room, I've been contextualized in regards to what my role is. And I think that artists in general have a hyper awareness of their cultural experiences, but they should not be defined simply by those experiences. So I should be allowed to make a comedy or make a drama, and it doesn't necessarily have to be about a bank robbery or some violent act. But I think the moment an individual enters a room, the perception is, oh, he knows about these things and he needs to discuss these things. So I think in some ways, when individuals try to walk outside of those realms, we are quote unquote put in a particular place. Oh, you can't do that, or you can't talk about that, or you might not possibly know about those things. So I think in some ways, we are uniquely capable of communicating specific experiences because of how we experience the world. But at the same time, we are more than that.
Tristan, I want to direct this one to you. So given all that we've heard from everyone, how do you think we can inspire persons of color, particularly men of color, to do more, given the fact that their ethnicity is always with them? What's the inspiration for individuals of color to succeed?
I think, kind of taking into account that what everyone's saying, a lot of it can be, I guess, solved with visibility. A lot of creativity, a lot of culture that we follow today, pop culture, has stemmed in Black spaces. There's in music right now, like there's a huge wave of house and dance, and that predominantly started in queer Black spaces in Chicago. Like it's knowing the roots of these major influences and seeing the visibility of that. Like a lot of times that when I was having conversations with my friends, they were lacking inspiration because they did not see visibility of what they could become. And that would really help, seeing someone in their footsteps, or maybe a mentor that they can look to and be like, you know what, he's achieved it at somehow. I would also love to achieve that, and I want to know the steps.
And Shayne, how would you say, what kind of inspiration do you think someone of your generation needs in order to keep motivated, keeping themselves motivated and moving forward?
For me, generally is just telling them that they are enough in who they naturally are as people. And so that's like the starting point. For when I was president, a lot of people just didn't know that they were enough, that, they made it to college, but they didn't think that they were enough to show up to class. They didn't think that they were enough to, produce the work that they were producing, even if it meant standing alone. So letting them know that they're enough and that they deserve a chance to choose what they want to do in the future. But those being like the first steps, everyone deserves a chance, so give yourself that one.
And Eric, I'll pose the same question to you. How do you inspire this generation of artists to keep on?
I think that no is not an answer. I think that you wake up in the morning and you write the 5 or 10 things that you want to try to accomplish. And after 6 months or a year, you hope you've moved the needle closer to those things. I'm circling back to something that Wes said. I think that in terms of networking, you want to be around like-minded people. You want to look forward to doing your work. And you hope that when you make the work, other people see it. And that, once again, opens up more avenues for more people to continue working. So I'm of two minds. The first mind being, anytime I see something that is holding someone back, it actually makes me work harder. I stay up later. I try to help businesses that I think are doing things that I can't do. So on the one hand, if I'm seeing something that's stopping somebody and I feel like I can do something, I'm going to work towards that. If I have opportunities and I'm able to move myself forward or the people that I'm surrounded by forward, then I'm going to try to extend that knowledge so that others can follow those paths as well.
Do you think there's a need to have people that look like you at your institution?
I've thought about this. Oh, sorry, I don't know if you're, I'll just answer quickly. I think that there are things that are said that aren't necessarily complete as sentences or as clear, that are only understood by certain individuals. And so, yes, seeing individuals that you don't have to go into a long communication in order to communicate why you're feeling a certain way or why you're trying to say something, creates an inclusive language that I think is needed. So that diversity is very important. And I don't think that that's understood over a short period of brief bursts of communications or assignments without having someone in the room that understands that language.
So can you be a little more specific and clarify that for us?
Well, I mean, one thought that I had, because when Dave Chappelle had his comedy special and he left the show, he mentioned that people were laughing for the wrong reasons. And that was something I understood. And I don't think that there's portions of the world that don't understand that. So that's an example of, he said that one little soundbite and I knew exactly what he meant. But I've had conversations with other people that are kind of like, what does he mean? I don't understand. So I think that culturally having similar experiences allows people to, and I'm going to say commiserate on certain levels and use their art as therapy sometimes, or use their art to heal others. And if you haven't had those shared experiences, it takes more time to communicate those feelings.
Wes, please comment on what Erica just said. Do you agree with that?
I mean, yes, I do. Like the majority of that for sure. And just thinking about like this idea of visibility. And I would say that I think there's one step further than just seeing. We do know situations where there are maybe a sprinkling of us in a situation, and what ends up happening is you see that person, but you don't know if it's the right move to congregate with that person. You might want to think about, actually, if I identify with my Blackness with another person who identifies with their Blackness, is that a strategic move in a space that is majority white? And people are always doing those negotiations. And so what I would say is, it's beyond seeing the conversation of, I think Shayne was saying, like, is it enough? And just really knowing it's enough. And I would say those calculations happen, depending on people's cultural context, right? Coming from like Detroit, I would say that there's no problem with me linking with people because of like that are Black and trying to see them because they are Black and associate with them with a shared, you know, an initial shared understanding of like culture, history, context, and things like that. But being in Detroit, which is a majority Black city, that's the only way people know how to associate, really. And so thinking about like these spaces that Tristan was talking about, you know, like a Chicago and House and like origins of like cultural movements. I think depending on where you are and where you've been raised, and that can change the way and how you associate. And if Blackness is there, could be an attractor or repellent, and it depends on like how you've been raised and socialized and things like that. And so I think it, not with a full answer, I think it's beyond just the seeing, but there are like there are experiences of Blackness like people have to have that actually see that if and when you associate with your Blackness, a lot can happen for you, for your career, for whatever you're doing and your expression. And just going back to the question, like, is it enough? And you know, I think from different cultural contexts, people know that's more than enough. You know what I mean? And some people don't know that. And so I don't know what the answers are, but I think there is something that beyond like representation and seeing that really like needs to be figured out.
Now, I want to ask this question of each one of you, and while I do so, I would love for our audience to put questions that they may have into the chat box so that we can ask you their questions as well. But the question I want to ask you right now is, what more do you think can be done to support men of color at VCUarts? What more do you think can be done right now to support men of color at VCUarts? Why don't we start this time with Errol?
I think that a lot of times institutions that they are, particularly universities, and I understand the sort of institutional barriers that come with universities. It's not so much, and very frustratingly so, it's not change that can always be made in the ground in your department, in your office right away. But instead, what I think is important in that is to not be discouraged by the struggle. And I feel like it's also shouldn't be the burden of people of color to continue advocating and taking that work on themselves. Of course, we can advocate for ourselves. We don't need anybody to advocate for us, but rather I'm calling on our allies to advocate with us, to stay in those emails, to stay going to meetings, ask your colleagues what they can do to help you as you're applying for grant funding. Everybody is searching week to week for grant funding, institutional things that can really help provide material security for people of color and underrepresented communities in the arts world. We have the absolute privilege as VCU, I still count myself as VCU, proud VCU alum, our national profile as one of the best, if not the best, public arts school is a real opportunity to not only be a theoretical leader, but rather one that physically enables the change that we need. So I would say staying on top of your institutions, holding your institutions to the fire. People seem to think that because we're working through the university system that it becomes an insurmountable barrier. That defeatist attitude alone does a lot to stop material change. And so I just, again, want to highlight for our allies, one of those things that you can be doing is to help stay on top of those emails, help stay on top of those grant funding, help bring those opportunities to the admin's desk. Even it has to be a collective effort to move that forward, despite institutional red tape.
Wonderful. Tristan, what more you think can be done to support men of color at VCUarts?
Well, Errol went on a really great, like, that explanation was beautiful. I couldn't have said anything better myself. Another aspect that I think would really help men of color at VCUarts is a direct line of mentorship. Going off of that visibility aspect that I was talking about, it is really imperative that, because creatives and artists kind of have this, the world has a preconceived notion of them as being, kind of blunt, brash, like, very hard to kind of engage with. I feel like that also is somewhat of a thing within VCUarts. So if men of color were to have direct mentorship in, helping, these freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors kind of get a place or footholding on what life is going to be like after they graduate within their industry, within their respective, mediums and things like that. It'll help ease the transition, and it'll probably keep them more motivated in staying in school. Because I know for a fact, like, I came into the fashion merchandising program and I did not know anything that I was going to do. And Rudy Lopez, one of the adjunct professors at VCUarts, was Asian American, and he was also from my part of, Virginia, Northern Virginia. And he also, like, kind of reminded me a lot like my dad. So it was really easy for us to connect. And he was giving me the ropes on, like, how to apply for grants, scholarships, internships, jobs, things that I could be looking forward to in the fashion industry. So mentorship, that's a really big thing that I would think would help men of color.
Absolutely. Shout out to Professor Lopez. Shayne, what more do you think can be done to support men of color at VCU?
Yeah, I would say the consistency in which admin produces events, or controls, like, the spaces around, because I mean, we're talking about trying to change something that's been going on for years. And so, one event a semester surrounding it, or one community event a semester, isn't going to do it. And so, it, for me, it starts there, just consistency. And then I second Errol and Tristan's talks about their points as well. But for me, it's just about consistency and, opening up, allowing admin to open up beyond, and to hear students as well, because students are willing to speak. The communities are willing to speak as well, but if their energy is, focused on sending 25 emails to, people that are in positions of power, then a lot of their energy, by the time they get awarded the opportunity to speak, is just going to go out the door.
Eric, would you like to comment as well?
I'll start with the high tide lifts all boats concept. I think that there should be some sort of way to have a check-in first year after you graduate, 3 years after you graduate, 5 years after you graduate. VCU, not isolated to VCU, all schools love to celebrate successful individuals that have graduated from the school. If those individuals are somehow brought back into the VCU fold so that they can talk about their path from graduation, paying off their student loans, and life. Like I'm saying, the first year after you get out of school is probably the hardest, because you have the least amount of experience and you have all this debt and you don't know what to do. Some people have to find jobs outside of their career in order to make things work. So if there's some sort of clearer career path in terms of mentorship, as was mentioned, I think health and career goals, such as when to start a family, if you're going to start a family, those types of things also important. And I think that there are communities, there are businesses around here. I'm just, I know we're being recorded, but like Philly Vegan's not too far away. Ipanema's Black owned. The Nile is an Ethiopian restaurant. Maybe there's some graphic design. Maybe there's some commercials that can be made from art, from the art department, that helps that business, but then also helps that artist. So I think there needs to be more frequent integration of communities. I'm going to drop, when I was living in New York, NYFA, New York Foundation of the Arts, they would have a website, hundreds of opportunities for grants and things. And I realize New York's got more money and there's a lot of business going on, but I think there needs to be at least some sort of database where students don't necessarily have to talk directly to a faculty member to say, hey, what about this grant? You just have direct access to the things that are going on. Someone's job is to check in with alumni, juniors. And the other thing is, I think that we need to, as individuals, think a lot about what we want to do. So if you're a junior and you're thinking about dropping out of school, it's only going to get more expensive 2 years down the road or 3 years down the road. The shorter path, the cheaper path is actually to stay with it. And if you have the conviction to say, hey, this is where I want to be in 5 or 10 years, then I'm going to say that's actually the smartest way. You know, I've had friends that have dropped out of school. They did come back, but it took them longer than they expected. And obviously their friends, their support group had moved on. So I think that those, you know, I've got some more bullet points which I can share with you at some other point. But the main point is simply to have someone that's ahead of you. My brother's 5 years older than me. So as a child, I always asked him, what's coming, what's coming? That I think that you need to have alumni and other folks that are in your industry constantly communicating with people that have simply graduated or have graduated 3 or 4 years out, just to check in on and make sure they're okay.
That's great advice and great recommendation. Thank you, Eric. And to get faculty perspective on that, let's go to Sinclair first and then you, West.
Yeah, I think mentorship is good. I'm just reiterating what everyone has said, but I think that is great. But there are some type of specificity that has to happen. Look, not just racially, but looking at the dynamics of probably sexual orientation, family status, and all that has to come into it. So there might be programs that are designed to really look into these types of, I remember going when I was in grad school, there were opportunities for people of the LGBT community to come in and support. And I got my support really from communities that were found at UMD, but were from New York. So like companies from New York who later helped me out. I think bringing people and organizations in to help students, to talk to students, to offer mentorship, direct mentorship, giving them sort of the field experience, being out there in the world. I think that will be helpful for especially young ones growing.
Go ahead, Wes.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to articulate like some multiple points, which I agree with, like everything that's been said. And I think I think what we're talking about to support Black male students, because this is a panel of Black males, right? And just thinking about Black males, and then if we were to expand that to, you know, men of color, then I think VCU needs an imagination for a possibility. Not saying that this has to happen, but VCUarts could be majority Black men or men of color space. It could be that, and all these Black men of color could be thriving in this space. So I'm not saying like that necessarily needs to happen, but I feel like that needs to be an option on the mantle to be like, why does it feel sparse? And then why does that sparsity feel like where, you know, some of the like things are falling through the cracks, where, you know, VCU could be made up of any group of people, really just based on concerted effort and imagination. And so like I would advocate for that to be a thought and a goal as a thought experiment first, and then move backwards from there. And then I would also say that will happen with like a redirection of resources. Like, just put money. If this is a problem, then put money where the problem is and see where that goes. In a direct and a radical way. I don't think, I think when we talk about mentorship, that's the free option that can happen, right? That's the most reasonable, that's the base level. And I think mentorship is important, but that's also not saying where those resources are coming from. And so beyond grants, which is still an external thing, right? There's still there's a radical way of redirecting money from VCU to deal with this, right? And that's still labor on us to create these grants. And so I'm putting like a whole new baseline. And then I think what's really important, I do my best work of support in a mentorship role when students are in my space where I'm working. We're not in school, we're in the space of creation. And then there's mentorship happening, right? School is one thing where there's an agenda that happens, and then there's real learning, I think, where Tristan, even learned from like Rudy and things like that. But I think there needs to be like an ecosystem of Black maker spaces that is a strong ecosystem where people can go to inside and outside and move within these spaces. They are recognized, they are supported. And it's not just one. There are multiple where people can move through, but I also think where I lack, and I feel like I fall short, is I've had to put a lot of investment in making a space of making that is my own in VCU or in Richmond, which has, been rewarding in one way, and is like kind of been a barrier in another way. And I see when I'm in Detroit, where I have like a full maker space, I have the space, how easy it is to bring people in, even if they don't go to school, and mentor people if they're not in VCU, and how success can happen when there's a strong space that is not the institution space to be able to provide these opportunities.
So you're saying develop a space both internally and externally from VCUarts?
Yeah, and I would also say, like, what Sinclair was speaking to, like these chosen like communities to like help mentor that are very specific. This is like another thought, but it's just like, as faculty, would there be a way for us to recognize talent outside of admissions and things like that, to be like, look, this person should be here, deserves to be here. I know this person, have a connection with this person, so therefore this mentorship will be consistent because of a relationship already built. Can we bring these people through this system where, you talk about pipeline? Well, we all know, we all have a pipeline of talent and understand where it's coming from, and are cultivating it in all kinds of different ways that are not, facilitated by VCU, but there's also a way that we could bring them into VCU if there are other ways to think about how admissions work and things like that.
All good stuff, which of course we've got recorded, and I'm sure that Holly will listen to the playback and jot down some of these ideas to discuss and talk about how to maybe bring them to fruition. As a man of color, there is discussion about approachability and putting on the mask, if you will. Is it important, and how do you advocate for yourself to be authentic? I'll start with you again, Tristan, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Approachability.
Yeah. So a year, I'm almost a year as a VCU alum. And within my time, I've, was granted the opportunity to do a creative residency in New York, where I worked with big companies like YouTube, Nike, Google, a bunch of different things. And from working in these white spaces, I've known that, or I've come to be very comfortable with who I am as myself. And the reason why I say that is because as a creative, there's something that my cultural background, my experiences, my influence that I have that's what attracted them to even bring me on. So there's no reason that I should change myself in order to make other people feel comfortable when I'm a minority. Like, I'm getting paid to share my experiences, to share my influence in the work that you are requesting from me. So there should be no reason why I need to put on a mask.
Errol, same question. The importance of approachability, wearing a mask, being your authentic self.
I think the idea of masking, and sorry, I'm just trapped in like a sort of historical sort of mind always. But, you know, masking is such a sort of important tradition in just Black culture, sort of, and persons of color in general. It's that sort of subversive sort of navigating. And while I think that you should always remain your authentic self, I think there are moments in which there's kind of that subtext. I think kind of what someone on the panel was saying, that sort of understood, maybe nonverbal communication that I think is actually really effective. But I would always advocate for being your authentic self, even through that. I mean, you can't be anybody else but yourself. And especially in a lot of the work that I personally do, approachability doesn't necessarily matter to me. I know that what I bring to the table is smart, it's correct, it's a lot of the times really valuable. So I try to just always lead with my authentic self, and then back it up with, you know, my talent. And I think that we should recognize that all of us are so very talented. So lead with your authentic self and back it up with your talents, because you've got them.
Absolutely. Shayne, what your perspective on that?
Sure. I would say, like, I would second Errol's and say that, you know, like, being yourself is definitely, well, being myself has definitely created opportunities that I've been a part of, which I don't think I probably would have gotten if I wasn't really myself, or if I did gotten, or if I did have, I wouldn't have appreciated the way I did. But for me, like, just remaining myself creates like a natural filter for the people that I interact with. And so I see it in even like the work that I do in my paintings in general. Um, you know, I can't hide my paintings. I can't like code switch my paintings or anything like that. And so I'm not going to try to. And so if you are interested in my paintings and interested in the work that I do and then the reasonings behind them, then, you know, you have a somewhat genuine interest in what I do. And so, you know, I'll converse in that manner. But it's really, the transition between like high school and college to me was a little weird because I felt like I had to code switch to basically like survive within my artwork. I just remember people, and they still ask me today, like, oh, do you only paint Black people? Do you only paint Black people? And it's like, well, you don't ask a white artist, do you only paint white people or anyone else? And so I basically like, I just started like code switching because no one would accept the work that I do unless I like told them something else. I was like, oh no, I actually do paint other people. But now it's like, yeah, I paint Black people, but what? Like, what's up? Like, what else? And that's attractive to the right people. And concerning like the right people is not really my concern anymore. It's like if I code switch, then that's really not me. But I understand it for survival.
You've developed a niche of people who they like your art for what it is, correct?
Correct.
Excellent. Eric, let's go to you. What do you think of approachability and being your authentic self?
I think that when I communicate, when I approach people, I tell them sometimes politically correct, but I tell them how I feel. I would say over time, and I just jotted this note down real quickly. First, I think it's important that you read any situation, read the room. If you're dealing with a client that you've never dealt with before, It is possible that you're not completely your authentic self, but you are still yourself. Because I think that the problem that we deal with is figuring out you have to survive, you have to make money, you have to not burn bridges. At the same time, you do want to be yourself. So I think that reading the room allows you to make certain decisions at certain points. And I'm going to say the older I get and the more when you guys are saying like your crew, if you work with a certain group of people that you can be your more authentic self on a more regular basis, then the less you feel like you have to make compromises in certain situations. And so I think that's also an aspect, having a supportive crew. And I'm saying that if you know, like when I first graduated, I basically said, whatever comes through the door, I'm going to say yes to it. I just want to have money flowing and I want to have a consistent thing. I think the more you become established and feel comfortable with yourselves, the more you can start to say more about what you want and have more expectations of those things, as well as negotiating in terms of how much money you're going to make on any particular thing. So I think that becomes more your authentic self as you take risks. I'm going to take small bets.
We have a question that came through the chat line, and this would be a great question to sort of end things on, and that is, are there any arts-related projects that you guys are working on that you are especially excited about and would like to share with all of the audience that's here today? And, you know, Eric, why don't we go back to you and we'll go through ask everyone the same question. What are you working on right now that's really exciting for you?
So my personal project, I call it the Innocent Project. The idea is that I do, when I hear awful things on the news, I try to create a piece of artwork and I try to just send it out into the universe. So that is, there's no money involved. It's more of a, hey, you got this, to anybody that's seeing it. So that's a slight side thing. I will also, you know, I will drop a name. This guy's name is Terry Thompson. He makes music. I've had a relationship with him for probably 20 years. I met him at Capital One when I was working there trying to pay off my student loans. He calls me consistently to do album covers or singles. And so I'm working on a project right now. He sent me some music. And, you know, I just, at the beginning of January, I said, thank you, because I don't think he realizes how much he puts me in the right frame of mind to create artwork. It's not, I mean, he pays me, but it's not for the money. It is the feeling that I get when I'm working on exciting projects that I'm actually most excited about. So there's those two things.
Excellent, thanks for sharing. And Shayne, what are you working on that's exciting for you?
Currently right now, I'm not working on any like big like series-based work or anything like that. But I will say with the residency that I'm doing, I'm exploring more of like just the passion projects that I want to do and getting out of the like structured like dates and assignments that come with just being in school that I just didn't believe I had the time to do. So that's what I'm doing right now. But in terms of the residency, it's just been good to be able to go back to my old high school and then like help students there and like give them like a fresh like mindset surrounding artwork so that they can even like appreciate other mediums that they may not be accustomed to, and you know, help them grow as people within that.
So if I can be nosy, what are some of those passion projects you mentioned?
Sure. So the ones that I'm doing right now is actually like a baptism, but just how like Christianity has its roots in Black history, things like that. I'm a big like researcher, so I really like researching and collecting like stories. My whole premise is making sure that there are stories behind like the people that we know, but then there's stories behind those people as well. So one of my base series-based work is Winifred Mason, Shayne, but she was the mentor to Art Smith, but everyone knows Art Smith and not necessarily her. And she's the one who helped him get to where he was, but she wasn't get there because, well, one, she was a Black woman during that time, and a lot of her, you know, history wasn't recorded. And so I try to do the work in trying to find those types of stories and bring them through how her stories have went through like the 80s and the 90s and even modern times and how it is involved what we do today.
Great, thanks for sharing that with us. You might want to talk to Errol as well. And Errol, we're going to jump to you. What are you working on that you're excited about?
Right now, I'm working in conjunction with the curator of contemporary art, Jade Powers, to sort of rethink some of our contemporary galleries. So we're doing a lot of object research, really interrogating the collection, and I'm excited about that. More personally, I'm working with artworks from our own collection to kind of explore some of the themes of Afrofuturism and sort of these themes of Black ascendancy that I feel like may have gone unnoticed in our collections until they got some good boots on the ground that might be equipped and interested in those. So hopefully more soon.
Wonderful. Fingers crossed. Tristan.
Yeah, currently I'm working on my own clothing brand. I started that with two of my best friends from the School of Arts. And we have an upcoming showing in next week, Saturday, in Richmond with a really reputable store, kind of like a menswear staple here in Richmond, in recent times. So working on those projects, and yeah, honestly, just kind of keeping it small, doing like freelance graphic design work for brands here and there, and yeah.
So, quick question: you're showing next Saturday. Is this open to the public?
Yeah, it's open to the public. It's gonna be a culmination of other brands throwing a like kind of like this big market at Essentials right off of Lafayette. So if you guys are in the area and you're free next Saturday, the 22nd, feel free to come and have a good time. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Sinclair, what's happening in your world?
Well, I'm working in conjunction with the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., ACE in New York, that's the Association for Cultural Equity, and together we're building an archive to archive African dance. And what we're doing is to create replications of all these dances we have. The first phase is to replicate 89 dances from Africa and African Isles. We have been granted a room for our lab at VCU here starting in June, so I'm excited about that. The work is really to give African dance artists and Black artists all over the world a platform where their works can be seen. They need remuneration for their creation. So this may create a kind of a platform where people can go to and see the history, the stylization, the methods for creation, and who is doing what now.
Thank you, Sinclair. And Wes, last but certainly not least, what's going on with you?
45 years of undiagnosed ADHD. So billions of projects. So I would say things that I'm really excited about is I'm working on some performance pieces. One is with VCU faculty who was in this room. I don't know if he's still in here, Trey Bien. We're working on a performance for the Shed in New York that premieres in December. I'm also working on another performance called The Slap, which is dealing with like that suspends the Will Smith and Chris Rock moment in a performance piece through sampling. And so it's a whole thing that we're developing. I'm starting the residency that I run in my studio in Detroit is about to start. We're inviting collectives and collaborations to join us. So we have some really interesting projects coming into the studio for the summer. And I'm also inviting some Richmond people who's coming. Sandy Williams, Mariana, a few other VCU grads will be in the studio in Detroit, and we're going to be helping incubate some garment work that they're working on. But the thing that I'm really excited about is I'm starting to scale up the work, and so I'm thinking about Black utopias, from building compounds and campuses and intentional spaces through development. And so I'm mostly doing this in Detroit, where I understand the landscape and I can afford real estate in a way that I can't do in other places, and start to experiment with like how utopias work in compounds and things like that. So those are a few. I still got a whole lot of other projects that I'm really excited about.
A lot going on, Wes, but thank you for sharing what you're doing. And on behalf of the Office of Inclusion and Equity, I want to thank all of our panelists for being with us today to talk about men of color at VCU.
Thanks everybody on the panel. Love to build with everybody. Definitely appreciate being in community in this panel and just seeing what's going on. So please reach out. I would love for Holly, for you to keep this going.
I just want to thank everyone for attending this panel today, and I just want to thank our guest for this. This has been extremely informative. We are going to be continuing these types of conversations here at VCU School of the Arts. So I really, really, really appreciate the hard work and the time that our alumni spent, and our faculty. Our faculty are so busy. So thank you to Jarvis, thank you to Sinclair, and thank you to Wes. And Wes knows I have a way of thanking him. They are stellar faculty, as you've seen by their bios. And so for them to volunteer, I mean, I think Wes is headed to Detroit. So, it is wonderful for them to participate. For our alumni, thank you so much. Tristan and Shayne, I like, when I was thinking about this panel, there was no ifs, ands, or buts. I knew who I was like, I know exactly who just graduated, who I want on this panel, for this panel discussion. It has been a pleasure to meet Eric. Eric actually teaches part-time for us, just to FYI. And Errol, oh my gosh, what wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much for your contributions to this panel. I just wanted to tell everyone, thank you so much for joining today. I know that several of you have just gotten off because you've either got class or et cetera, but thank you so much for those who stayed on. And I really appreciate this. Everybody take care.